It all began with a single text message, one that crushed everything I thought I knew about my life. "Enjoy poverty," she sent, followed by a string of laughter emojis. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My wife, Sarah, the woman I married with all my heart, the one I trusted completely, was telling me to enjoy poverty. But that wasn't even the worst part. The real sting? She wasn't just being cruel for the sake of it. She had been cheating on me with Brandon, a millionaire businessman. And this betrayal didn't just break my heart, it cost me my $200,000 engineering job. I had spent years building my career, dedicating myself to my work, all for this, all for her. And now I was losing everything. But that's just the beginning of this nightmare. It all started with that text, and as I later discovered, it wasn't just my heart that was shattered, it was my entire identity. Before I take you through the rest of this crazy journey, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. At 38, I had everything I ever wanted. I was a successful senior engineer at a prestigious firm, pulling in $200,000 a year. My career was on the rise, and I had no reason to believe that anything could derail the perfect life I had built for myself. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for almost 10 years. We met in college, and to me, she was everything. Beautiful, kind, supportive, the type of woman I thought I could grow old with. We had a lovely house in the suburbs, a couple of fancy cars, and weekends spent traveling the world, enjoying the fruits of my hard work. Life was good, or so I thought, but recently something had shifted. It wasn't big at first, just small things I brushed off. The way Sarah seemed distant when we talked, how she'd often stare at her phone, distracted during dinner. She stopped asking about my day, and I noticed she was spending more time with friends who, for some reason, I never met. I chalked it up to stress at work, thinking she was just busy with life. After all, who wouldn't be, right? But as the days went on, the distance grew. Sarah wasn't the same. She was colder, more distant, and I felt myself pulling away too. And then one day she came home later than usual. I wasn't surprised. It wasn't uncommon with her new work commitments. What did surprise me, though, was the look on her face when she walked through the door. It was different. There was something in her eyes, a look I couldn't quite place, a mix of guilt and detachment. I didn't question it at first, but something in my gut told me that all was not well. I just couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping away from me. I remember that night so clearly. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing blueprints for an upcoming project, when I heard my phone buzz on the table. It was a text from Sarah, "Enjoy poverty." That simple, cold message. It didn't make sense at first. I thought maybe it was a typo or some sort of sick joke. But as I stared at it, the meaning started to settle in like a stone in my chest. I clicked on the message thread, only to find a chain of text that made my heart drop into my stomach. The messages weren't to me. They were to someone named Brandon, a name I'd never heard before. As I scrolled through them, my blood ran cold. The messages weren't innocent at all. They were flirty, intimate, full of jokes and shared moments. Brandon was no stranger. He was someone Sarah had been seeing behind my back. For months, I felt the world start to spin. The anger, the disbelief, the betrayal, it all hit me in waves. How could she? How could she do this to me after everything we'd been through? After everything I had given her? It was in that moment, as I stared at those messages, that my perfect life began to crumble. The facade of our marriage, the life I had worked so hard to build, was all a lie. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Every inch of me screamed in disbelief. I couldn't even process what was happening. The world around me felt like it was closing in. The air thick with the weight of betrayal. I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. My hands were shaking as I waited for her to answer. The seconds felt like hours. When she finally picked up, her voice was casual, almost too calm. "Hey, Lucas, what's up?" I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk," I said, my voice colder than I intended. There was a brief pause, and then I heard a soft sigh from Sarah. "About what?" I didn't waste any more time with pleasantries. "Who is Brendan?" I asked, each word coming out like a punch. There was another long pause on the other end of the line. And then finally Sarah spoke. Lucas, please. It's not what you think. I could hear her voice falter, but the weight of what I had just seen was too much to ignore. I think it's exactly what I think. You've been sleeping with him, haven't you? She didn't answer right away. And when she did, it was with a tone that I couldn't quite place. Yes, I have, she admitted, her voice flat. The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. You've been seeing him behind my back? All this time? She didn't deny it. Instead, her voice softened, almost in a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Brandon, he's different, Lucas. He's everything you're not. My heart sank. The truth stung deeper than anything else. She was telling me without a doubt that I wasn't enough for her. That everything I had given her, my love, my time, my effort meant nothing in comparison to the everything that Brandon could offer. I felt a knot form in my stomach. So what does that mean? Are we done? Is that it? Another long silence passed before she answered. Yes, Lucas, I'm leaving you. I've already made up my mind. Those words, those final words, were like a punch to the gut. Everything I had worked for, everything I had thought was solid and true, was crumbling in front of me. And for what? A man with more money, more status? A man who could give her everything I had worked for, but with none of the loyalty or love I had given her. Before I could say anything else, Sarah added, I'm not coming back. I'm sorry, but it's over. She hung up before I could even respond. My hands were shaking, the phone nearly slipping from my grip. I sat in the silence of our home, the echo of her words ringing in my ears, and that was the moment I knew. My life was never going to be the same again. I couldn't undo the betrayal. I couldn't fix what had been broken. All I could do was sit there, alone, and try to make sense of the woman I thought I knew. The woman I thought I loved, the days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. It was like my entire existence had been reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, her words echoing in my mind. It's over, she'd said. And that was it. She was gone, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of everything began to settle in. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing everything I had worked so hard for. I went to work, but it felt like I was operating on autopilot. I tried to focus on the projects in front of me, but my mind was always elsewhere. I was thinking about Sarah, about Brandon, about what went wrong. It didn't take long before I started noticing the cracks in my professional life. I missed deadlines. I fumbled through meetings. My performance dropped sharply, and it didn't go unnoticed. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, a stern look on his face. Lucas, he started, his voice cold. You've been slipping lately. Your productivity is down and it's affecting the team? I nodded, too embarrassed to respond. The weight of my personal life bleeding into my professional life was something I couldn't hide any longer. I tried to explain, to give him some kind of excuse, but it felt hollow. My mind was elsewhere. It had been for weeks. We can't keep letting this slide, my boss continued. You need to get your head in the game, or we'll have to reconsider your position here. I left his office feeling numb. I knew what was coming. I had been a star employee for years, but everything had changed. My focus had shattered, and so had my career. I wasn't just losing my marriage, I was losing my identity. A few days later, I received the call. I was being let go. They had no choice but to fire me. My performance had plummeted too far, and they couldn't afford to keep me on. The $200,000 salary, the benefits, the perks, it was all gone in an instant. I was blindsided. I had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, dedicating myself to my career, and now, just like that, I was out on the street, but it wasn't over yet. No, this was only the beginning of my descent, with no job. No savings left after Sarah's departure. I found myself struggling to make ends meet. I sent out resumes to countless companies, but nothing came through. The job market was tough, and my reputation had been tainted by my abrupt departure from my last position after months of searching. and still nothing to show for it. I was forced to take a job I never imagined I'd be doing. I became a janitor at a local office building, earning barely enough to cover my rent. The pride I had once felt in my accomplishments was gone. I was cleaning toilets and mopping floors, my dignity stripped away with every swipe of the broom. I couldn't help but think about how far I had fallen. From an engineer earning six figures to a janitor working for minimum wage, it was a hard pill to swallow. And yet somehow life went on. I kept going day by day trying to make it through each shift, but then one evening, something happened that would change the course of my life yet again. It was an ordinary evening, one of many where I found myself cleaning late into the night. The office building was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the echo of my footsteps in the empty hallways. I had grown used to the solitude, the rhythmic motion of scrubbing floors and wiping down surfaces. It was monotonous, but it allowed me to keep my mind from spiraling too far. As I moved from one room to the next, I noticed a jagged piece of glass sticking out from beneath a filing cabinet. It must have fallen when the cleaners from the day shift hadn't noticed. I bent down to pick it up, but as I did, my hand brushed against the sharp edge, and I felt a sharp sting shoot through my palm. I hissed in pain, pulling my hand back instinctively, but the damage had already been done. Blood began to trickle down my wrist, dripping onto the floor. I cursed under my breath. It wasn't the worst injury I had ever sustained, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. I knew I needed to get it checked out. I wrapped a paper towel around my hand, trying to stop the bleeding as best as I could, but the wound was deep enough that it wouldn't clot on its own. My first instinct was to just go home, clean it up, and forget about it. But I couldn't. I had learned not to ignore my body, not anymore. So I gathered my things, took a cab, and headed straight to the hospital was almost empty when I arrived, which wasn't surprising at this time of night. After filling out some forms and waiting for what felt like an eternity, I was finally called into a room where a doctor examined my injury. "Looks like a pretty deep cut," the doctor said as he cleaned the wound. "We'll need to do some stitches. But we'll also need to run some blood work to make sure there's no infection," I nodded, too exhausted to respond. Everything had become such a blur lately, my failed marriage, my lost job, the endless days of cleaning. I just wanted to get this over with, to have anything go right for once. The nurse took my blood, and I sat there waiting as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My head was spinning. The loneliness of my situation felt overwhelming. How had I gone from the top of the corporate world to a janitor, just barely scraping by? Where had everything gone wrong? Finally, the doctor came back with the results. He was quiet, his face unreadable as he scanned the blood work results. I started to feel uneasy. The silence stretched on for a moment too long. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The doctor hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder as if considering whether he should say anything at all. "We may need to consult with some specialists." "Specialists?" I repeated, confused. Doctor nodded, his face serious. "It's probably nothing to worry about, but I'd like to get a second opinion. Please hold on." I watched in bewilderment as the doctor left the room and returned moments later with 3 other specialists in tow. They all crowded around the computer, peering at the blood work results. I felt a surge of anxiety rise in my chest. What could possibly be so wrong with my blood work? The doctor who had first treated me turned toward me. "Sir, your DNA results show something impossible. Something that doesn't quite make sense." I stared at him, trying to process his words. Impossible? What was he talking about? "You're related to..." The doctor stopped, his voice faltering. The room suddenly seemed to shrink around me. My heart began to race. The other specialists exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the room was palpable. "What does that mean?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. My mind was swirling. The doctor cleared his throat. "Sir, the DNA results suggest you are connected to a family we don't typically see. Your genetic makeup. It's related to someone extremely wealthy, someone with a lot of influence." I felt a wave of dizziness rush over me. I was connected to someone powerful? Was this some sort of mistake? Was this a prank? The doctors didn't seem like they were joking, though. They kept staring at the results as if trying to make sense of the data themselves. You're related to... The doctor started again, his voice more deliberate this time. You're related to Brandon, the man your wife, Sarah, has been seeing. I felt my body go cold. Brandon, the millionaire? The man who had destroyed my life? I couldn't process it. My whole world spun out of control. Was this some cruel twist of fate? How was this possible? The room spun as I tried to make sense of what the doctor had just said. My ears rang with disbelief. Brandon? The same man who had stolen my wife, the man who had been behind the destruction of my marriage, was somehow linked to me. It didn't make any sense. How could this be true? How could I, Lucas, be connected to someone like him? The specialists exchanged glances again, their faces tense, their brows furrowed in confusion. They looked at the screen as if hoping it would reveal some sort of explanation, but all I saw was a glaring truth I didn't want to face. The doctor continued, his voice steady but laced with caution. It's not just a distant connection. The results show that you are directly related to Brandon. Your biological father is Brandon. I felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under me. My stomach twisted in knots, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My father? The man who had destroyed my life, who had taken my wife away from me, was now my biological father? The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in around me. I couldn't escape the weight of those words. My mind raced, but no matter how much I tried to make sense of it, the facts were clear. I wasn't just some unlucky guy whose wife had cheated on him. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. No, my entire existence had been based on a lie, carefully constructed deception. I wasn't even the person I thought I was. I was no longer. Just Lucas, the man who had worked his way up from nothing. I was Lucas, the son of a billionaire businessman, Brandon, the same man who had taken everything from me. The doctor's voice cut through my thoughts. We understand this is shocking, but we need to be certain about the results. This is a rare genetic match, and it's something that cannot be easily dismissed. My head was spinning. I wanted to shout, to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was clouded with confusion and anger, each emotion fighting to take over. One of the specialists, a middle-aged man with glasses, stepped forward. Lucas, we've already done some further testing. We're not suggesting that you were adopted without your knowledge, but we do believe this may explain the confusion around your family background. Have you ever questioned your biological parents? I shook my head. No, my parents were my parents. I grew up with them, loved them, respected them. The idea that they weren't my real parents was unthinkable. Have you ever thought about doing a DNA test before? Another specialist asked gently. Any history of adoption, maybe? I felt a strange heat in my chest, a mix of embarrassment and rage. Adopted? How could I not know this? How could my entire life have been a lie? I couldn't finish the sentence. I was at a loss for words. How was I supposed to process something like this? The very foundation of my identity was crumbling. How was I supposed to go forward knowing that I had been living someone else's life? The doctor, who had remained mostly silent during the conversation, spoke again. Lucas, I know this is hard to understand, but the facts are clear. Your genetic markers point directly to Brandon. It's not just a distant familial link, it's a direct one. We suspect that you were adopted as a child, and for reasons unknown to us, this fact was kept from you. I looked down at my hands, adopted, but why? Why had my real family kept this from me? And why had no one ever told me? Was it all part of some twisted game? My thoughts began to spiral. Sarah knew. She had to have known. She had been aware of the truth for all this time, while I had lived my life in ignorance, believing I was just a regular guy trying to make it in the world. But why had she betrayed me in such a cruel way? Was it because of Brandon? Was it because of the wealth and power that came with his name? I could feel the bile rising in my throat. The anger I had been suppressing for weeks, months even, came flooding back all at once. Everything that had happened to me, the affair, the loss of my job, the humiliation of being fired, The loneliness of my new life, it all suddenly made sense in the worst way possible. My wife had been with me only because I had been her ticket to a life she could never have imagined. And once she found out the truth, once she found out that I wasn't really who I thought I was, she had turned to someone who could give her the life she really wanted. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need to get out of here. The specialist tried to stop me, but I couldn't listen. My whole world had just come crashing down. I had no answers, no way to make sense of any of this. The doctor's final words echoed in my mind as I left the room. Lucas, you need to take some time to process this. We're here to help you, but you need to understand this changes everything. I couldn't get those words out of my head. You're related to Brandon. It was like a mantra, a chant that reverberated in my mind, drowning out all other thoughts. The world around me felt distant, like I was living in some sort of twisted dream, a bad dream. The kind you wake up from only to realize it's your life. I left the hospital in a daze, my mind racing. My legs felt like they were made of lead, each step heavier than the last. I stumbled to my car, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely get the key in the ignition. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I wasn't just a man who had been cheated on. I wasn't just a man who had lost his job and was now scraping by as a janitor. I was someone else entirely. A man who had been living a lie for his entire life. How could everything I thought I knew be false? The drive back to my tiny apartment felt endless. My mind was a blur, a whirlwind of thoughts that I couldn't seem to control. I kept replaying everything in my head, the affair, Sarah's betrayal, the text message, and now this revelation that I was somehow connected to the very person who had destroyed me. The man who had everything I could never have done. As I sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex, I could feel the anger building inside me, the rage, the hurt. It all collided in a rush of emotions I couldn't hold back anymore. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, my frustration spilling out in the form of raw, guttural screams. It felt like the world was mocking me, laughing at my pain, my confusion. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what to believe. The idea of being Brandon's son, even indirectly, made me sick. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen it coming? But as the anger faded, a more chilling thought crept into my mind. Had Sarah known? Of course she had. She had known all along. She'd known who I really was. She'd been with me only because of the connection to Brandon. She didn't love me. She had never loved me. She'd loved the idea of me, of what I could give her, but not me, the real me. I felt like a fool. How had I been so naive? How had I not seen this coming? My entire life had been built on lies, on a foundation of deceit. I wasn't just angry, I was broken. And more than that, I was lost. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. I tried to go back to my janitorial job, but it felt pointless. The people I worked with were strangers. My coworkers barely acknowledged me, and I felt like a ghost in the halls I once walked through with pride. I had lost my job, my wife, my identity, and now I had lost the very essence of who I thought I was. I started drinking, a lot. I'd never been much of a drinker before, but now it was the only way I could numb the pain. I would go to a local bar after work, order a drink, and sit in silence, staring at the glass in front of me, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the world would make sense again. But it never did. One evening, while sitting at the bar, I overheard a conversation between two strangers. They were talking about business deals, about investments, about opportunities, and then the name came up. Brandon. My ears perked up as one of the men mentioned his name. Yeah, Brandon's doing well for himself. That guy's a genius. Made a fortune last year alone. You know, the CEO of that big tech firm. I clenched my fist around my glass. The name hit me like a slap in the face. Brandon, the man who had everything. The man who had stolen my wife, my job, my dignity. He was the one who had everything I could never have. He was the one who had orchestrated this whole mess without even realizing it. The anger surged again, and I stood up abruptly, knocking over my drink. I stormed out of the bar, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I needed to do something. I needed to confront him. I needed answers. I needed to know why, but deep down, I knew the truth. It didn't matter anymore. I had already lost. The man I thought I had become, was nothing more than a ghost. And no matter what happened next, no matter how much I tried to fix things, I couldn't undo what had been done. The next few months were a blur of numbness and frustration. I had stopped going to the bar and drowned my sorrows in the silence of my small apartment. But deep down, a part of me knew I couldn't keep living like this. I had to find a way out. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, even if I didn't know where to start. I had been a man of action before. A man who worked hard for everything he had. A man who believed that if you put in the effort, you could rise above your circumstances. So why should now be any different? I wasn't going to let myself drown in this pit of despair. I began with the basics. I cleaned up my apartment slowly but surely. I removed all reminders of Sarah, all the things that tied me to the past. The wedding pictures, the letters, the gifts, everything went into a box, shoved in the back of the closet. I couldn't look at them. I couldn't look at the woman who had once been my everything, only to become a symbol of betrayal. The next step was finding a new job. I sent out resumes, tons of them. I used every connection I had left, calling in favors, begging for interviews. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake, if I would ever find a way back into the career I had lost. But one day after what seemed like countless rejections, I got an email. It was a small company. Nothing near the prestige of my former job, but it was something. I didn't care about the title or the pay. I was just relieved to have something to hold on to. I went in for the interview, my heart racing with uncertainty. The company was different from what I was used to, less corporate, more laid back. They were willing to take a chance on me, despite the gap in my work history. Maybe it was the desperation in my eyes, or maybe they saw something they liked, but they offered me a position on the spot. It wasn't engineering, but it was something. It was a start, and so I began again. I started working in a lower level position, doing data analysis for a small tech startup. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had imagined for myself. But it was a job. And for the first time in months, I began to feel the spark of hope flicker back to life. The next few months were full of hard work. I didn't have the luxury of working with top-tier projects or managing big teams anymore. I was just another employee trying to prove myself again. But this time, I wasn't just doing it for the salary or the recognition. I was doing it for me, to prove to myself that I was more than just a failure, more than just the man Sarah had tossed aside for a richer, more powerful man. Slowly, I started to rebuild my confidence. I immersed myself in my work, dedicating my time to mastering new skills. I read books on leadership, on personal growth. I took on projects that stretched my abilities, knowing that if I didn't push myself, I would stay stuck in the past, and along the way I started to heal. It wasn't easy. The nights were still long, and the loneliness still crept in, but I learned to embrace the solitude. I realized that I didn't need someone else to define me. I didn't need to be Brandon's son or Sarah's husband or the man who had once held a six-figure job. I only needed to be me. As the months passed, I made new friends. Some were colleagues, others were just people I met along the way. But each connection felt like a small piece of my shattered world being put back together. I wasn't just the man I used to be, I was evolving. One day as I walked into the office, I realized something. I didn't feel like a failure anymore. I didn't feel broken. I felt strong. I had made it through the hardest part of my life. And I was still standing. The man who had walked into that hospital, broken and confused, was gone. In his place was someone new, a man who had faced betrayal, pain, and loss, and had come out the other side. Not unscathed, but stronger. And then a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. I glanced up and saw a text from Sarah. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment. The pain of the past was still there, but it didn't hold the same power over me anymore. I had no desire to relive that chapter of my life, to go back to the person I had been. I deleted the message without replying. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Conclusion: a new life awaits. As I sat at my desk, reflecting, On everything that had happened, I realized that the hardest part of the journey wasn't losing Sarah or my job. The hardest part was accepting who I had become and choosing to move forward. Now, my life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had built it from the ground up. I had faced the hardest betrayal imaginable, but I had survived. And the future? Well, that was in my hands now. It had been a long and painful road, but I had found a way out of the darkness. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. So I guess the real question is, what happens next? If you've made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep that it changed the course of your life? What did you do to rebuild yourself after losing everything? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, like this video if you found it relatable, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Share with someone who needs to hear this message of strength and survival. Thanks for watching. And remember, you are stronger than you think.